For the eternal you must be proof against the transitory that would distract and pull you from it. This is done by understanding, realizing what I've just said. It's the valuing of the eternal over and above the transitory. So we do not follow after transitory distraction. We lock into the eternal by our understanding. You see, this is life eternal, to know God. Your God is the eternal, not the fleeting pleasures of the transitory. And to be a blessing in heaven, you need to have this valuation, this value, that you value heaven above any other state of living. Thank you, Dad. It follows that we value the company of, not transitory activities, but the being with. Our friends, those that love us and we love. Give you an example. The transitory is not to take precedence over the valuation of the eternal. You're born, ideally in some sense, into a loving parent relationship. They love your prosperity. They love you having life. Most distressed if you die on them, you see. And they give to you accordingly. And it's just giving. It's an ideal relationship, one that ideally should be mutual too, that you give to them. Hence, one of the principles, the great principles, is to honor your parents. And of course you know that this relationship is not to be spoilt by incest. But that would be to shift the relationship onto one of transitory pleasures, which would in some sense destroy the stability and permanence of the ideal relationship that you have with the parents. Religion has been seen as the ideal marriage. But the marriage is not actually emphasized as being between yourself and God. That's a relationship of parent to child. The ideal relationship of marriage was for The church as the bride. In the Christian setup. I'm not sure, but I think this is a sort of hangover from the Old Testament, the Hebrew view of the spiritual concern actually being the nation, and the nation needs to be in right relationship to God. And that's visualized as a perfect marriage. And the church has to be faithful to have such a perfect marriage. Because there's tremendous emphasis on its submission to God. Probably because that's the Hebrew view of an ideal marriage, that in some sense the wife was in submission to the husband. It's some ideal, presumed ideal view of the transitory, although it's seen as a marriage in heaven by the sort of Christian view, but the Christian view is a different religion pasted onto a Hebrew view. The Jesus story is not preoccupied in any way with Israel. It's not talking about the state achieving some right relationship with God. Jesus in the story is preoccupied with individuals, not the world at all and the kingdoms thereof. It's emphatic from the beginning that this is simply one of the temptations. Look, all this is mine, and the power thereof. You can rule. And rule means you can do it your way. That's what you want, isn't it? And it's a temptation. That's not actually what Jesus wants. He says to Satan, get behind me. That's not what I'm aiming at. It's not what I'm moving towards. It's not what I value. I'm valuing God, not ruling the nations in some perfect way. Oh. And Satan's thinking, why ever not? What's the matter with you? This doesn't make sense. Because Jesus is not for them. Where Satan is in the story, you understand. Jesus is not seeking to rule the transitory and to have all the power over such. He's rescuing from such addiction. In favor of life eternal, the right relationship with our Heavenly Father. That's what counts. And we live accordingly too, and are sent to declare such to those that have ears to hear. Thank you, Dad. So what's the substance, the working out of this enlightenment, this understanding? Well, in very simple ways, it's that I don't seek after pleasure, I seek after that which gives life, and life eternal. No, I won't have that to eat because it's not necessary to my living, and it's actually damaging to it. You know, I mean, it might be a food that rots the teeth, as far as you know, or a food that harms your health. Simply too much of some food, for instance, harms your health and well-being. So you resist it. You just say, no, I don't think I have that. You're not allowing the pleasure of the transitory to interfere with or cut across your eternal well-being. It's not that you're sacrificing your well-being. You're sacrificing transitory pleasures that destroy your eternal well-being. Well, that's very reasonable, isn't it? Surely you'd be a madman to do otherwise. And you realize that the way the world lives is madness and brings so much unhappiness. I don't mean there aren't some sorrows and unhappinesses in the world. If you live right, although your suffering will be greatly removed because you're not concerned for the future as regards it being a loss, but a great benefit. This removes much suffering, of course. And you remove much of that which will damage your life too. Because you're not a victim of transitory pleasure and temptation. There are difficulties still in being in the world. Persecution. Because it is a world of ignorance, the unknown, uncertainty, you see. Uncertainty about what causes what changes, and uncertainty of valuation of things. But we have an overall perspective, set of values that sets us on right course. And we know this in that we find much joy and peace and hope and assurance, and love and kindness and grace. In living accordingly. Thank you, Dad. It's a curious thing, but we can start by thanking God for all that we see as good. And with enlightenment, we start to realize some things are not so good. Not to be valued like some of the other things that we actually thought were bad, but have brought goodness and understanding and enlightenment. So what we're thanking for tends to shift, because our values are shifting away from the transitory that has long-run costs, if you like, towards all that brings life eternal, and builds on this wonderful relationship with our Dad, our Heavenly Dad. And of course we thank most earnestly God for that, for rescuing us into life eternal, for becoming more and more conscious and overwhelmed by His loving kindness, His presence, our Dad. Thank you, Dad. We learn much from falling in love. Just to be with our beloved is wonderful. We don't need to make love. You might wander into making love, but that's just an expression of your loving kindness to each other. It's not a seeking of sexual pleasure particularly. And indeed, if the making of love is not, the sexual pleasure turns out to be problematic, it can start to interfere with the relationship as time goes on. If that's what you shift to valuing from each other, instead of the heavenly company of each other. So for many people, the hoped for permanence of the marriage relationship becomes transitory, in that it shifts into the degree to which the relationship brings transitory pleasures that we're addicted to, which was not the preoccupation when we were in love. I just needed to spend time with you, ideally all my time, preoccupied with a relationship that eclipses the transitory pleasures. It's so satisfying and wonderful to me just to be with you, just to sit with you, just to be beside you, just to be in your company, just to love you. So we learn much from falling in love here in the universe of the transitory. And we know the fruit of such goodness. It's peace and joy and blessing and generosity and love and loving kindness and such a willingness for peace and goodness. The whole world sings. Well, you can have that relationship with God. He's a reliable partner too, faithful and true, of incredible integrity. More worthy of such relationship than any other being in or out of the universe. One would be a madman to knowingly choose and prioritize anything else. than your relationship with him. This is the basic spiritual truth. There is no other. Never has been and never will be. It is life eternal. To know God. Bless you.